Hey guys, welcome to the video. I'm going to be doing a walk around of this Baja Bug in this video. This is actually the second walk around video that I'm doing on this bug. However, I'm going to call this one walk around number 2. Walk around number 1 was one of the first videos that I made. It's really not very good. It's a pretty bad video. So a lot of things have changed on the bug. So this walk around is going to have all the updates. And it's also just going to be, I think, hopefully an easier video to watch. So this bug originally started as a 1967. Interestingly enough, when I bought it, they were telling me it was a 1969. I didn't even know it was a 1967 until I got home and looked at the title and saw that it was a 1967. When I bought it, it was already a Baja, although it was kind of a standard run-of-the-mill Baja. It was basically just a Volkswagen Beetle. It had the 5-piece fiberglass kit installed on it. This bug, because I am in Colorado and I'm close to the mountains and the foothills, I'm not building it like a regular Baja that you would see out in the deserts. I'm building this for mountain trails, which means I have to focus on trying to keep it short, as short and skinny as I can, because the trails that I'll be driving it on can get kind of small. There's also going to be a lot of uphill and downhill, and the traction is going to be pretty loose. So let's roll it out of the garage here so that I can get it in the sunlight, and I'll walk around and show you some of the features and some of the things that I've done to it. So let's start with the motor here. This is a 1600cc dual port. This is the motor that the bug came with when I got it. It's not the motor that came with it from the factory. Since this is a 1967 bug, this would have been a 1500cc motor. Going off the numbers on this motor seems to be, or at least this case seems to be from a 73, 74. What I've done with the motor since I had it is I tore it apart, took everything apart, cleaned it up. I added a lot of new parts to it. I fixed what was broken. However, I'm not calling that a rebuild. That's, in my mind, that's a refresh, because I didn't put in new pistons or anything like that. I just checked everything out, replaced things that were broken or out of tolerance, and put it back together. Because since it's only a 1600cc dual port, I don't think this is my end game motor. I think this is just my motor to get me started. Once I've got this bug complete and on the road, I think my next project will be to build like, a 1900cc motor that's a little bit stronger or something like that. So this one's just to get me going to start with. The transaxle that I have in here now is a bus type 2 with the 537 ring and pinion. When I bought the bug, it came with a type 1. And the type 1 that it came with was actually in good shape, and it appeared to operate fine and all that. But I knew that I wanted to go with 33-inch tires, so that transaxle that I had the 412 ring and pinion. So because I wanted to design the chassis around the transaxle, I at that point upgraded to the bus so I could get the 537, so that hopefully that'll help with the 33-inch tires. When I installed this transaxle, I tilted it up at about 12 degrees. I'm not 100% sure it's 12, but I know that it's more than 10. I did that so that I could kind of angle it down so that I could get the shifter in the tunnel. So the shifter is still in the tunnel on this, but then I wanted to angle the engine up some so that I didn't sacrifice a lot of ground clearance on the tail end. That also helped me be able to position the output shafts pretty low, which makes it so that I can get a higher ride height to give me more ground clearance underneath the transaxle. The chassis on this bug has evolved a little bit from the time I started working on it. When I first started working on this, I wasn't sure 100% how I was going to do this. As it sits now, the only thing that's really factory on the chassis anymore is the tunnel. The tunnel is still in place. I've got square tubing on the bottom of the chassis that's welded to the tunnel. The square tubing, number one, makes it so that I can easily fasten aluminum paneling to the bottom. So the whole bottom of the chassis is made out of aluminum paneling. So I've got the tunnel, which has still the stock shifter positioning and all that. And then I've got a couple places where square tubing ties in, like this is part of the chassis. Then if you come out here, I've got a piece of rectangular tubing that on this body is now the rocker panel. The square tubing on the chassis and the rectangular tubing makes it so that I can easily bolt these two together, and that's nice because this body is designed so that it can be lifted straight up off of the chassis. So when you lift it up, this piece goes with the body. Yeah, I kind of designed it as I went. So when I was starting the design, I had this square tubing that I was tying into the tunnel, tying into the rocker panel, and kind of integrating it into the body. But then as I went to the front portion of the chassis for the suspension, it turned into 1.5 inch 095 DOM tubing. And as I went to the rear portion of the chassis for the rear suspension and the engine, again, then I abandoned the square tubing and went to the round tubing because it's nicer, stronger, easier to work with, except for the square tubing was better because it's easier to install the paneling to and to connect it to the body. So the chassis kind of evolved with the Bug, because when I started building this, I wasn't 100% sure where I would go with it, and as I would work more with it, I would get better and better at certain parts of the build. So I would tear apart some of the parts, chassis being one of it, and redo some of those. So that's why I kind of started with a square rectangular tubing and has now evolved into better round tubing. So like I was saying earlier, the body was in really bad shape. You can see areas like this red piece is from a donor out of a junkyard. I cut it out here and welded this piece in because the one that came from Florida on the body originally was so rusted out here it was unsalvageable. Same thing in the front here. This piece again on the original body was rusted out so bad here I couldn't salvage it. So this actually came from the same car that the rear one came from, and I haven't ground this one down yet, but cut it there and welded it back in. You can see here I've still got more body work to do, but I'm not going to worry about things like this until I'm actually at the point where I'm doing body work and getting ready to paint, because I'll have to, for stuff like this, I'll have to just kind of form metal and cut this stuff out and weld it back in there as best I can. But this is about the last of it, so it's not too bad. There was a heck of a lot more when I started. You can see both sides have new rocker panels because, again, this portion was just completely rusted out and the rocker panels originally were destroyed, so putting in this rectangular channel really helped with that. Also, the door pillars were completely gone, completely rusted out, so I ended up making my own pillars out of steel, which also helped because I was able to easily make that integrate into the chassis. I've actually experimented with a couple of roof racks, but at this point I haven't found one that I like, or I haven't made one that I like, and it also kind of bothers me the weight that it puts on top. So I'll probably have some future videos where I make another roof rack and see if I can get one that I like. Maybe I'll end up making one that I can easily take on and take back off. And I've remade the rear fenders a couple of different times. I just made these because every time I redo the suspension and I get the compression to come up a little bit higher, I have to remake the fenders to match that. Although this should be my final go around on the rear suspension, so I think this will be it. So I installed a set of Willwood reverse hanging pedals on this. This is the rear brake, front brake, this is the clutch. Right now all three of these are 3/4 inch bore. I've got I think they call it the 5:1 ratio for the pedals. I did that because I was really cramped for space in here, because you can see it's very tight clearance to my steering shaft and the floor doesn't go down that far. So I went with 5.1. I did fill these a couple weeks ago for the first time, so I've actually got to feel how the pedal is, and it's a very tight pedal. It doesn't take much movement to slow the bug down, and although I've just been using it in the garage and on the driveway, it really doesn't take much pressure to get it stopped. So far it's panning out really good. This pedal assembly does have the balance bar, and then I did go with the balance bar adjusting knob because I think what's going to happen is, as I go from the street to the dirt in the mountain trails, I'll probably want to adjust this because I think it's going to behave differently between the two. And if not, it seems like a lot of fun to be able to experiment with this on the fly, so I went ahead and got that. It's pretty cool because it's got this cable that just ties it into the balance bar at the back there, so you can just spin this at your will and affect how much it's going to put pressure on the rear or the front. The front brakes are Jamar disc brakes with Jamar hubs. The rear brakes are latest Rage. I might need to upgrade these at some point to Jamar rear brakes as well. I originally went with latest Rage because they were so much cheaper, but I think I'm going to pay for that on the back end. The turning brakes, which I've got in between the seats here, are from CNC. Haven't been able to use these yet because I haven't had the bug up and running, but I've got them bled now. They feel good. I'm really excited to see what it's like to play around with those out on the trail. Like I said, it is tight up here. I'll see if I pay for that in the long run by having everything squeezed up in here. But I didn't want these. I could have got these pedals with the master cylinders hanging on the other side of the firewall, but if I did that, then these would constantly be getting blasted with mud, water, dirt, rocks from the front tires, and I didn't really want that. So here they're a little bit in my way, but they are protected by the interior of the body. I felt like if I made an A-arm setup for the front, I could get more travel, have more adjustability, possibly a smoother ride. And I gotta tell you, building that front suspension, having to change all the chassis and figure out the geometry and all that, that was a lot of fun. And I did it all just basically on the garage floor. You know, I didn't really lay too much of it out. And it actually, I'm really happy with how it came out. It only gained, I think I'm at like 15 inches of travel on the front, so I really didn't gain as much travel as I thought I would. However, it does have the potential for about 5 more inches of travel on the compression. So if I really wanted to, I could get more travel out of it. However, with the way it's set up now, at full compression, even though the tires are just barely outside the wheel wells, at full compression right now, you can still turn the wheels lock to lock. And I kind of like that. But if at some point I do decide to get about 5 more inches of travel out of there, I can make it so that it compresses farther. It'll just go up considerably higher than the fenders, and then at that point I won't be able to turn lock to lock at full compression. I think from the factory, being that this is a 1967 Bug, this would have originally been swing arm. When I got it, it had already been converted, I think a long time ago, to independent rear suspension. And originally when I was building this Bug, I was making trailing arms, and I was going to stick with the trailing arm suspension. In fact, the first thing I did is I made a set of trailing arms to use the torsion housing and use the torsion bars. And that was actually a pretty good setup. But then I decided I wanted to go away from the camber issues that you get with using that beam. And I made a new set of trailing arms, and I cut out the torsion housing, and I had designed that so that it was pivoting off of that straight portion of the chassis there. So then that was still trailing arm, but it now carried the same camber all the way through the suspension because the pivots were straight. They weren't angled back like the torsion tube setup. And I had those set up with the coilovers and everything, and that was a good setup as well. The problem with that is I was playing around with these U-joint drive shafts, and when the trailing arm goes to its extremes, the distance from the hubs to the transaxle changes dramatically, and that wreaks havoc on these splines because it makes them come in and out a lot, which puts a lot of pressure on the transaxle. And I really wanted to play around with the U-joint drive shafts. And to be honest with you, at that point, I really just wanted to try making some A-arm rear suspension. So I ended up abandoning that second set of trailing arms, and then I made a A-arm suspension setup in the rear. In doing that, I went with the micro stubs for the hubs and brakes. Those are really nice. And then I switched it over to A-arm. It was an incredible amount of work, but so far I'm really happy with it. And I do have a separate video on that. I'll put a link to it here, so if you want to check that out in detail. For my fuel system, I've got this RCI fuel cell in the back. Originally this was a 15-gallon fuel cell. However, when I went to the A-arm suspension, I had to notch out the back corners of the fuel cell in order to make clearance for the shock absorbers, and I also had to cut 2 inches off the top of the fuel cell. So it's no longer 15-gallon. If I had to guess now, it's probably 10 to 12 gallons, which I'm still fine with. I don't think that's going to be a problem with just this 1600cc motor. When I was hacking up this fuel cell to make it shorter and to make clearance for the shock absorbers, I also added a bottom sump fuel pickup. Originally, when the cell was new, they wanted you to take the fuel line off the top, but I switched it to the bottom so that it's more of a gravity feed. It goes through a little pre-filter here, and then it goes into an electric fuel pump that's mounted underneath the cell over there. Now for electrical, there's no real electrical on here yet, but the videos that I'm making right now are for the installation of the electrical system. And what I've come up with so far is I've got an access door in the back here, and then down inside here I've got what's going to be my electrical box. All I've got right now is my fuse distribution panel and my battery. I am going with lithium batteries on here. That is an anti-gravity battery in there. It's supposed to be good for about 1200cc. My end game is I want to have another battery over there, same size as this one, so that I'm covered for up to about 2400 cc's, according to the manufacturer. So looking back on it, obviously there's some things that I would do differently at this point, and I'm not even done yet. I would have definitely started with a better donor. I wasted a lot of time, and I'm still going to waste more time just doing body work, that if I had started with a Bug that was from Colorado, not from Florida, it wouldn't have as much rust. If I had the chassis to do again, which at some point I might remake a new chassis for this one, I would probably have it made more out of round tube, less rectangular, and not so much that I don't like the rectangular or anything like that, but I think at this point I could make a little bit better and a little bit lighter chassis if I had just made it all round tube and then integrated that round tube into the forward portion of the chassis and the rear portion of the chassis. Because as it is now, I kind of built the main chassis around the body, and then I built the round tube front portion of the chassis, and then I built the round tube rear portion of the chassis. So I've kind of got 3 chunks of chassis welded together. If I redid it, I could make it all round tube and integrate all 3 of those into one, and then I would not require as much material to do that, so it would be lighter and probably a little bit stronger. So that's it, guys. I hope you liked the video. I hope it helps you out. I've got a lot of other videos showing a lot of the work that I'm doing to the Bug. Check some of those out if you want. Subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you on some other ones. Take care.